Good afternoon, and welcome to the Intergenerational Dialogues on Women's Leaderships and Women's Rights. I'm Morgane Coquille, and I will be the moderators of today's event. And we have the honor to have Dean Susana Malcorra today to be our guest speaker. So Dean Susana Malcorra has a lot of works in public and the private sectors, including in the UN as in the UN Secretary General, but she also has a strong engagement into women leaderships and women's rights, and she's one of the founders of the Global Leaderships Women. And now I let the floor to Susana Malcorra.
Thank you, Morgane, and it's great to be here. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to stand up for a while. You can stay there, Morgane. The ones who know me know that it's hard for me to be sitting for a long time. Listen, we will have the opportunity to have a dialogue today. But before starting our dialogue, I thought it would be good to go through a brief presentation to give you a sense of where we stand and where we want to center that dialogue. And people will be passing by the way, so just bear with me. I'm working on this. Here it is. First of all, let me talk about our group of women leaders, Voices for Change and Inclusion. I represent that group, and I'm wearing today two hats, the Dean's hat and the leadership of this group of women. We are 54, let me go back. I'm doing something wrong here, I know. How do I go? Here, yeah. We are a group of 54 women. All of us have held very senior positions in government, in the UN, in the system at large. We have presidents, prime ministers, Secretary of State Madeleine Albright is part of our group. And we have gathered because we strongly believe in multilateral system. It's something that some of you are studying very closely, I know, in your master. But we also believe that the multilateral system has been key to make progress in the gender agenda. So that's what unites us, and that's what brings us together, is 54 voices that try to raise issues that otherwise might not be here. So I'm representing that group as one of my different hats that I wear. Oh my God, what do I do? I'm not able to use this. I promise I do when I have classes. So here you are. This is what we are, 54. You can look into it and see what we do. Our objective is to talk about real change. That's what we want to do. And that's what I expect we speak about later today. What is that is needed from your perspective to produce real change. This is driving me crazy, I tell you. Can someone help me with this? Sorry, I'm having problems with this. This is going forward. Can somebody help me here? This is moving forward, and this is moving backward. Okay, I assume it is. What areas of work are we mainly focused on? It doesn't necessarily work. I promise you, it's not me. Here we are. We are focused on these areas of work, and these are part of the things I want to discuss with you. We are working on domestic violence, on the problem of the most vulnerable people, on multilateralism post-COVID, on climate change, on food security, women, peace and security, and women economic empowerment. And all these issues we are trying to look at through the lens of women. We strongly believe that all these issues require a female perspective in order to really move the agenda forward. Why are we here today? Why is it that I wanted to speak with you all, and why is it that we are having this event hosted by IE, but also by our group. This goes back to the Beijing Declaration. The Beijing Declaration, and we have now celebrated 25 years of the Beijing Declaration, is a milestone event for us women. It's the moment where governments came together in Beijing to really embrace the notion of women's rights being human rights. It was for the first time that this was associated. In the past, prior to Beijing, the notion of women's rights elevated to that comparison with human rights, although it looks crazy today, was impossible. So Beijing is a key moment for us women. What is the Beijing Declaration? You have it there. It's a text that after, it says here it's a 2 weeks political debate. It is true, Beijing was 2 weeks, but the lead up to Beijing, the work done in order to prepare Beijing took a huge amount of work. And what it really brought together is a shared perspective, a common vision on how to embrace the question of women, the question of gender. And it is very important that we recognize that this happened in China 25 plus years ago. It was a moment where China was at a very different place, and the fact that this discussion took place there made a significant difference to really be able to embrace some of the ideas that were very forward-leaning, and that probably, if this discussion had taken place in the Nordic countries or in the US or in Europe at large, would have been much harder to move forward. The symbolism of a country that was not there yet, but embraced these ideas, was significant to move the agenda forward. What is it that it covers? It covers 12 critical areas. They were very relevant at the time. Most of them continue to be relevant. Most of them continue to be relevant. Some, the priorities have changed, but we cover there poverty, education, health, violence, armed conflict, economy, power and decision-making, institutional mechanisms, human rights, media, environment, and the girl child. And the girl child issue is a very important one because that includes the question of a marriage, early marriage using girls as a target. This Beijing Declaration is the fundamental step that defines and shapes the agenda that we have today. And why is it important that we speak about it? Because I'm not certain that the Beijing agenda remains as significant as it was then among the younger generation. And that's why we feel that it's so important to have this intergenerational dialogue. While it's true that there is a long way to go because the agenda has not been fulfilled yet, there are many parts of the agenda that have stalled, that member states have not made progress on. It's also true, and one needs to recognize that there has been a lot of progress on policies in many parts of the world that would have not taken place should Beijing not happen. But we stand at the moment, 25 years after, where the agenda has lost energy, has lost that stamina that it had. And we need to resurface that energy in order to push forward, because while we don't push forward, there are many that push backwards. And that is something that I want you all to understand. What has been recognized as rights, the progress that has been made, and many things that we have been able to conquer are not set in stone. Things can go backwards. And in fact, there are many groups interested in pushing backward. So it is important that we think about how to move forward. And this is what brings us together. And I will suggest that you all look into what generation equality is. This is a concept introduced by UN Women in order to resurface the agenda that Beijing created, in order to check whether that agenda is still relevant as is, or whether it should be somehow adjusted. And in celebration of the 25th anniversary, they created this idea and this sort of movement around the agenda that has been there for so long. What happened last year, this happened last year. Of course, COVID hit, and as everything, we got into a frozen time, and everything was postponed. So what was supposed to happen last year is happening this year. And there are going to be two fora, one in Mexico at the end of March, and another one in Paris at the end of June. And there, the idea, let me see if I can do this, yes, is, again, to check the agenda, to have a broad consultation among civil society, among different stakeholders, bringing the perspective of the much younger generation, a generation that probably was not born when Beijing took place, and really decide which are the priorities that we need to work on moving forward. Recognizing that there is a stock that we can take on progress, but there's a huge gap that we still have before us. But that gap can only be measured with the eyes of you, young people. It's not good for me to say what the gap is, because I have history, I know the history, I have an experience, I have a life that is different from yours. And we can only project a better future in this area of interest, which is women's perspective, women's rights, if we look into the younger generation. The forum has divided in what they call action coalitions, which summarize to a certain extent what the Beijing agenda represents. It simplifies because it divides in 6 action coalitions, so it simplifies and puts into an easier approach the way forward. First one is gender-based violence, nothing more important in these days of COVID. Economic justice and rights, again, so much to do. Bodily autonomy and sexual and reproductive health and rights, very long name, which, as you know, has an acronym, SRHR. Feminist action for climate justice, climate and a feminist perspective. Technology and innovation for gender equality. What more important today than technology and innovation moving forward after COVID? That was not captured in Beijing. Of course, it was a different moment, a different time. And feminist movements and leadership, and that's something we can talk about today. And, of course, the question of women, peace, and security is always there. So the idea is to have a compact agree on principles on women, peace, and security. I don't know if you are aware of this, but one of the things that we lack the most is representation of women in conflict resolution, in mediation, in negotiations. While women are the ones who carry the weight of conflict and the impact of conflict, they are not present in the resolution. And that's one of the reasons why many conflict resolutions are not sustained in time, because they do not take into account the ones who have to carry it forward. So we, as GWL, decided to launch these intergenerational dialogues. We have created a network of universities, and IE is part of a network of universities, and we hope to really associate these different universities from different parts of the world, the Mandela School from South Africa, school from China, from Korea, Wesley College from the US, Georgetown, Xianpo. We hope not only to have these conversations with each one of the groups in order to listen to what you have to say, but we also hope to associate you in a network to really make the case on the issues that really mean something to you or are a priority to you. We want to reach out as many from the younger generation as we can. We have found that, interestingly enough, I saw people nodding here when I spoke about Beijing, and of course, most of you are really associated to these issues. But if you walk around and you ask your young colleagues and friends whether they know about Beijing, most of them will know nothing. That is a problem, because people of your age tend to believe that what we have acquired so far has given is not. Has been a long and well-fought achievement which can be lost at any time. And we need engagement, commitment, and a priority based on your views. And of course, we need your help in making gender equality strong. This is not something that we can do on our own. And older people like me can only go so far. We need your energy. We need your commitment. We need your conviction that these issues are a priority. And we need your commitment in the direction that you believe is most important. So with this, I finish here as an introduction. I'm ready to discuss with you any idea, any question, any suggestion that you may wish to put on the table, but also to answer any question that you may be interested in hearing my views. In the meantime, I understand there is also a very important message here. The IE library has a lot of content on this regard. And learning about this, understanding these issues is fundamental. So this shows to you where to look for further information. I just cover very lightly a very profound and broad subject, so you are invited to go there. Without further delay, here I am. Morgane, I'm back with you.
I had a question for you. So one of my friends worked at the UN, and while she worked at the UN, her boss sat down with her and told her that as a tall, blonde, and well-spoken woman, she would always have to prove herself. And because of that, she experienced it, and every time she was walking in a room, she had to prove herself. And I was wondering, since you worked in both the public and the private sectors, did you see a shift in this? Did you see that, of course, you needed to prove yourself, but maybe it was more and more accepted that as a woman, you were strong enough, intelligent enough to participate in the debate and to have your voice?
Well, I'm old enough to be able to tell you that when I went for my first job, by the way, I'm an engineer, which is a very odd combination of skills to then become the Minister of Foreign Affairs of my country or the Chief of Staff of the Secretary General. So, but that's my background. I'm an engineer. When I finished school, I, of course, wanted to get my first job as an engineer. And I was an adjunct at the school, at the faculty. I was an adjunct professor. And the professor I was working with was a very well-recognized engineer in the automation business, which is what I specialize, automation. And he recommended me. He gave me a letter of recommendation for a job search of a company that was a supplier to him in the place where he was working, besides teaching. And I thought, you know, I was good at what I did. I had very good grades. This professor of mine writes a letter of recommendation. This is good. I'm starting with a good foot, the right foot. So I went and had 4 interviews. All of them I knew that went well. So I'm invited to the last one with the Director of Human Resources. And this is a European company. I'm talking about a European company. I won't name which one. So I go there convinced that I'm going to be offered a job. And I sit down and he starts speaking and say, well, Ms. Malcorra, it has been a pleasure, blah, blah, blah. Unfortunately, we cannot offer you the job. So first thing that surprised me is that he made me go to an interview, and this was not in my hometown. This was in Buenos Aires. I live 300 kilometers away, and they wouldn't pay for my trip, by the way, just to mention. So I was assuming that they were going to say yes, as I said. Well, he said, unfortunately, not. And I said, well, what are the reasons? Where did I fail? And he said, well, we cannot take you, we cannot offer you a job because you are a woman. So I got a bit upset, I have to recognize. And I can imagine the face of this man when I said, listen, you are the Director of Human Resources. You saw my file from the beginning. My name is Susana. What was your assumption? Because it would have been so much simpler. I wouldn't have lost my time. You wouldn't have lost yours. Of course, they couldn't say no because this professor of mine had written the letter of recommendation. And they were a supplier of this very important company, and they didn't want to upset the gentleman. So what they did is they took me through the whole thing with no intention to hire me, but just to find a reason why they could tell my friend, the professor, we cannot hire her because she's not good at here, here, here. They couldn't find that. And so they just had to say what was the real reason. So things have moved. I think it's very unlikely that any of you will face a situation where somebody tells you, we will not hire you because you're a woman. Having said that, the biases are there, and are there all over the place. And you said something that is interesting. This person told your friend, you are a young woman, and you are beautiful. I mean, you are blonde, blah, blah, blah. That is something that is very interesting. The fact that one is young or one is pretty seems to play against how serious, how professional, how really committed to do the job one is. My advice is, that's not your problem. It is their problem. You go for it. You do what you have to do. You work hard. You bring your voice to the table, because that's the other thing. It's true that you see more women now sitting around the table. They do not necessarily sit at the places where voices are supposed to be raised. And often women themselves do not raise their voices to make their case. Please, take your space. There's nobody that will give it to you just for free. So going back to your friend, I'm sure there are many examples that one can give. Things have evolved. But as I'm sure you know, it will take more than 100 years to get to full parity if things continue to move at the pace that they're moving, and in certain places, moving backwards. So we need to do something. We cannot wait more than 100 years to see us sharing what we have the right to share, which is 50% of everything.
In relation to what you say, there was an interesting quote that was published on the Instagram page of UN Women that said, if there is no seat at the table, bring your seat yourself. So it's about the idea that even though you're not invited here, just come and raise your voice because it's really important. And so it's kind of echo what you just said.
Definitely. And the table is a symbolism of power. And you have to think about this. In the end, the issue is power sharing. The ones who have had the power for themselves for very long are not keen to share it so easily. So not only one needs to be willing to fight for our space and our priorities, but also we need to be ready to fight for power. And that doesn't mean that all of us have to be in power positions. Some may want, some may not want. That's fine. But all of us need to be cognizant that our voices need to be heard. And we need to make our case. So that's why it is so important to have you here, to listen to you, and to hear your views, which I want to hear.
I will ask a last question, and then we will go to
okay.
So the UN Women published a report to show the impact of COVID on every SDGs and how it impacted women differently. And so, according to you, how do you think it's going to decrease even more like the fight we had for gender equality? Because most of the women that are being affected are in like social job currently. And that's why, for instance, in the US, most of the unemployed people were women.
Well, first of all, COVID has impacted Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals big time. At least people consider that 10 years are going back based on the impact of COVID. In fact, some of us believe that we should recalibrate the SDGs, because unless we do that, it will be hard to keep pace with objectives that you feel are useless. But that's another story. We can talk about that in a different situation. Regarding the impact on women, of course, women are more impacted. First, women have a larger share of informal jobs. That's one thing that, the first things that went away were informal jobs. Second, women are responsible for the caring in their families. So the fact that this COVID brought us into our cocoon, the home, where we had to do everything, and even the ones who retained jobs, were teleworking, had to do many things at home because the children were there, the husband was there. The notion of not sharing absolute responsibility over the family, all those things have an impact on women. And what is even on education, of course, women and girls are more impacted. But what is more worrisome is that not only women have, and gender violence, of course, I mean, violence at home is horrible, has increased dramatically. It's not only that all this loss took place while we are in the pandemic, the forecast is that at least 30% of the women who were in the job market will not go back to the job market. So that is a huge impact on women's economic empowerment. And as you know, economic empowerment is the first step to be absolutely free to decide. So yes, the short answer to your question is it's going to be very bad, and we need to push to really put focus. All the policies that are designed by governments, all the interventions that are designed now by governments, which are many, need to have a gender lens. Not only they need to have a gender lens, we need to have data that is gender sensitive so that we can track the impact, the differentiated impact of these policies on women, girls, and how we really make a difference with these new policies.
Okay, thank you very much for your answer. Has anyone a question for Dean Susana Malcorra? See, Alex?
Yeah, Can you hear? Okay. One thing that stood out to me at the very beginning when you were introducing...
Can you introduce yourself so I know?
Hi, yes, sorry. My name's Alexis, and I'm in the mirror with actually many of us that are here, and with Morgan as well.
And where are you from?
I'm from the US. I'm from Illinois, from a very, very, very small town. And one of the things you said at the beginning, and that really stood out to me because this is one of the main reasons why I came here for the Masters in International Relations, and you said that there are very few women in conflict resolution and mediation. And that is something that I want to do. And I was just kind of curious why you think that is, or if you have any advice for someone like me. And I know she's in the same boat, wants to do the same thing as well. So I was just curious if you had any advice or why you think that is, because I think that is a huge role that women should be in, and it's kind of sad to hear that we're not at that table and how we could maybe break into that table.
Well, I'm so glad to hear that you're interested in that. I have sat at that table. I have that mediation. I have worked in conflict situations. So I know not only the difference that a mediator, a negotiator, a facilitator woman can make, but how much a woman in that position brings women from the place to really design solutions. That is what makes a big difference. I work a lot in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and it was a huge fight to be able to bring the civil society represented through women's groups to put on the agenda the things that represent most common sense and most of the time do not want to be tackled or do not want to be listened. So for me, again, this goes, and I simplify, I know that I simplify, but this goes back to power. You know, the idea that when you discuss this resolution of a conflict, you are at the peak of the discussion of power sharing, that can only be done by men. That's the mindset that many have. And for me, that is absolutely essential in being able to transform these solutions into long-lasting, sustainable solutions because the society is represented. For me, the beauty of any process, one that relates to conflict resolution, essential, is that you have the full representation of society. There is no way to build solutions if the society is not fully represented. By the way, we happen to be 50% plus of the society, and we are not there. So anything that is designed without that lens of the 50% is poorly conceived. And I really welcome the notion that you want to be there. You have to prepare yourself. You have to equip yourself. You have to retain empathy. That's the one thing that I will highlight. Women tend to sit, to listen more, and to see through the lens of the others more, and to put themselves into the other's shoes more. And that is absolutely essential to find solutions to conflict. And I always say, you don't sit with your friends to solve a conflict. You sit with your adversaries. At certain points, you sit with your enemies. That's where you start. So having a woman being part of the facilitation of that very tense situation makes a huge difference. Resolution 1325 emphasized that, but I'm afraid it has not delivered as much as one will hope, and we need to just keep pushing. That's why you saw there is a compact as part of Generation Equality on women, peace, and security, precisely for this reason.
I think there is also a question online from
Yeah.
Eleonora.
Yes, thank you, Morgane. First and foremost, thank you so much, Dean, for taking the time to be with us today. My name is Eleonora. I'm also in the MIR program, and I'm from New York. So I have a question for you. So as women's rights are advancing in some parts of the world, they're clearly regressing in other parts. When it comes to issues on gender-based violence, such as acid attacks, honor killings, the public stoning of women, or FGM, there's a clear trend of governments' unwillingness to affect change. So in your opinion, do you think that a bottoms-up approach involving more of a grassroots movement would be more effective in raising awareness and bringing an end to gender-based violence?
Well, you are spot on referring to gender-based violence as one of the big problems we have. It's a combination of moving backwards in certain places. It's also the recognition that we now put in figures the issue, which allows us to measure better and to have a better grasp of what is happening, at least in some parts of the world, not in all. I think grassroots movements are essential. And they're essential for two reasons. One is that women are great at the grassroots level. Women tend to mobilize grassroots groupings and grassroots interests in a manner that men do not necessarily do it as well. This is part of how we approach power. Let me use again the word power. The grassroots level is a more horizontal approach. It's a more consultative approach. It's more democratic. It's more listening and bringing issues in a manner that have been constructed by all. This is a very typical women approach. And I will argue that this is what can make the difference between make it or break it. The fact that we have a very strong grassroots movement. This is true in all parts of the world. It is even more so in those places where the issues are more challenging. Let me use an example that is not exactly gender-based violence, but it shows the power of grassroots movement. What has happened in Myanmar shows to you how people reacted and how people are opposing to this coup d'etat. And some of the movements are the health workers. And the health workers are essentially, as you know, women. So you are absolutely right that we need to encourage grassroots movements. In fact, I encourage you to get involved in grassroots movements. And we need to put pressure on governments and institutions. One of the big problems we have faced in the past 5+ years, I will say, that the discussion on the Beijing agenda, which every year the governments meet in March in New York for CSW, for the conference where they follow the status of women, is that there has been a coalition, and what I call an unholy coalition of conservative interests, some of them religious, some of them political, that have really made a concerted effort to push back on the agenda and have been very, very convincing to stall the agenda. So we have to put pressure on governments, but also in the UN system through the different configurations of discussion of these issues to put it on value. And these conferences, these forums that are going to take place in Mexico and in Paris this year on generational equality are an opportunity, because the idea is to really bring voices from the grassroots and really put on clear value the perspective not coming from the top, but coming from the bottom.
I think there is another question online.
Hi, I'm Siti connecting from Indonesia. Thank you very much, Dean Malcorra. Thank you for such an inspiring talk. I'm a student at the Executive Master of International Trade program and currently working in women and youth empowerment, and also co-hosting a parallel event to the UN Women CSW 65 next week. So my question is actually building on a previous question by the colleague. Would you please share your thoughts on women advocacy at the grassroots community level? Is there anything else that we could do to create alliances and champions other than being active at the global level, which is currently in a virtual forum, which is more accessible for everyone? Thank you, Dean Malcorra.
Thank you for that question. I'm glad to hear that you are connected from Indonesia. What a beautiful country. And I'm glad to see that you are in our Master of International Trade, which shows women working on different areas of expertise that sometimes people assume that are only men's property. So congratulations for that. I know we have a large cohort of women in that class. First, what I think we have as an opportunity is technology. You know, this world of ours that has evolved to become virtual and that has us all sick of Zooming and Teaming and you name it, on the other side has a unique opportunity if well managed. And we just said, we have our colleagues sitting in Indonesia connected with us, to make horizontal connections that go far beyond anything that one could think not long ago, only a few months ago. So my sense is that we have to build on that capacity that technology has given us to really network horizontally beyond our boundaries in the city, in the state, in the country, in the region, just to reach the world. And find ways to connect with groups of women that are working on similar issues to the ones that you are interested in. And this is something that is very important. You said that it might not be easy to connect to the forum. I sort of disagree with that. If you look into the website, there are many opportunities to network with other civil society groups. But if you Google and you say groups of women interested in whatever issue you're interested, the list that you will find is incredible. So what I will say is that with all the negatives that the pandemic has brought, it has brought a positive, which is to think in terms of digital to connect. It's not perfect. It's always much better to see each other, if we could, to touch each other, particularly for the Latinos, one like me. But having you on the screen and having you the opportunity to mingle digitally is great also, because it expands our net. So my advice is maximize the use of technology and virtuality in connecting. Which brings me to another element that I want to highlight, which is women and technology. We need to focus on that question because the digital divide may grow bigger. The fact that the ones who have access and the ones who do not have access may be even broader. And women, if not focus on the matter, may fall on the size of the lack of ability to manage technology and the digital space. So one focus on that, don't lose sight of technology.
Related to what you just say with technology, I think we should also really be careful of the negative impact it can also have. So for instance, since we have more Zooming and so on, there is also more sexual harassment towards women because people feel more protected with this lens of technology. But also with new technology coming up, such as AI, it should be also interesting to consider who is making the algorithm, because most of the time in these sectors is man-related. So because of that, maybe even though they don't try to do something against women, they can have internal bias, but they will communicate into technology. So I think we should have, I don't know, a system or discussions throughout these topics.
Definitely the question of biases in AI and associated technology is huge. Yeah. And it's a big problem. And I was just speaking with Maria Jose before starting the chat this afternoon about the importance of associating humanities and technology. Mm-hmm. Because the ethical and moral perspective of the use of technology is going to become more central. And the fact that we have different models to how to manage technology. Some of the models being totally in the hands of a private sector that is not regulated, which is a problem. And another one which is in the hands of the government being absolutely free to decide what to do. Neither one of those models is good. We need a regulated system that has principles, that has values, that really ascertain rights as a principle that is enshrined in what is designed. And again, remember, women's rights are human rights, and that has to be at the center.
Polly, yes.
My name is Polly. I'm also in the MIR, and I'm from the US. As of right now, there are 4 countries that have feminist foreign policy plans and agendas. Do you think that it's more important for these kind of feminist plans to be led at the nation level or at the multilateral level? Do you think they will make more of an impact in organizations like the UN, or if it stays on the level that countries get to make these ideas?
I think you need both. I think it's very important to have the national perspective, because that sort of sets a standard. It sets a standard that is easy, or it should be easy, let me put it like that, to replicate. It sets a model. But I also believe that the multilateral system should be an enabler. The one thing I learned in the UN is that there is nothing like peer pressure. When a subject becomes important, becomes recognized, becomes popular, becomes somehow the flavor of the day, everybody wants to be there. So we need the UN to generate that notion of the importance of a feminist foreign policy. Having said that, I don't have the latest numbers, but the number of ambassadors, women ambassadors at the UN is absolutely horrible. It's probably around 20%, if not less. When you look at the numbers of women in cabinets, very few countries have achieved parity. But even those who have achieved parity very often have women in positions of lesser power or lesser perceived power. So there is a long way to go here. And my sense is that the feminist foreign policy approach is one lever to really mobilize.
Hi, I'm Gina. I'm also from the US. I'm also in the MIR. So it seems like gender empowerment movements and feminist movements are often centered, generally speaking, around like cisgendered straight women or cisgendered straight white women. And I was wondering, moving forward, how do we create a more inclusive, like gender empowerment initiatives? Because trans women are women. Like, how do we create, moving forward, just a more inclusive platform?
Well, you hear me said sometime during my answers that we need to have a full representation of a diverse society. That was my code message for full representation. All types of groupings need to be represented. I will not shy away from the fact that many feminist movements are not ready yet to be more inclusive. And one could criticize this and say, listen, they should be the first ones to be ready to move forward. But one also needs to recognize that there is so much unfinished business on the basic feminist movement that the ones who have worked so hard to get where we are feel that they should not leave the cause. So my view in that, and I may sound naive in this regard, but that has been my approach in life, is to try to embrace and not divide, and bring the broader set of issues to the groups that are ready to move forward. And as we start to move forward, we prove that there is no competition, but there is a leverage from being together. Having said that, one also needs to recognize that there are different situations in different parts of the world. So it's I would say, fair to recognize that in certain parts of the world, if you add to the very challenging agenda of women, the absolutely impossible from the perspective of the tradition agenda of LGBTI and the rest, it becomes almost a foregone conclusion that you do not advance on any cause. So we need to focus on the issues. We need to come together as much as possible. We need to leverage from all the pressure that the different groups have and recognize that sometimes certain groups need time to pause or to grow into their own issues. You know, I have personally been involved. I don't know if you know this, but Secretary General Ban Ki-moon not only spoke very, very, very much about women and women's rights, but he spoke very, very openly about LGBTI rights and the rest. I saw Secretary General calling presidents because they were about to pass a law that will be affecting the lives of many people of transgender, of different groupings. So I saw that take place. I have been myself representing the United Nations, visiting certain governments to tell the governments, if you enact this law, we will for sure take out all our investment in your country because we don't think our people should be subject to this, not to talk about your people. So these things take place. Sometimes they are not publicly announced, or often just to make sure that we get somewhere. But in a nutshell, I think that it's important to build on the conquests that have been achieved, to leverage and broaden the rights-based approach to everyone, but also to be patient because there are different groups that might not be ready and we just need to allow the time. To avoid confrontation, because the best position for the ones who are against this is to see the different groups fighting between themselves. That leaves all the space for the ones who push back on the rights-based agenda.
Yes, Kike?
Yeah, I think that it is very important. Well, my name is Manrique. I am from Damir. I'm from Costa Rica. And I think it is very important that, Susana said, that the new generations has to step in and bring new issues to the table, or new ways of tackling old issues, which is also important. And my question is for the women in the audience, many of them who are my colleagues and friends. And I wanted to know, if we were to reissue Beijing, or to do a Beijing #2 right now, what is the #1 issue you will bring to the table? And how is that issue related to your personal experience, to your work, to your ideals, and to your vision of the future?
I love that. I love that challenge. I love the fact that the challenge is made by one male colleague who cares, clearly cares. So I want to listen to you. Tell me, who is ready to answer? Here or on the screen, eh? By the way.
Gina wants to.
I mean, I would say the first thing that popped in my mind was girls' education. And I think that's the first thing I would bring to the table. I really think, in my experience in Senegal, sorry, everyone is always hearing about me in Senegal, but in Senegal, like, that was the biggest point of intervention, like keeping girls in school and like what girls can achieve if they continue getting an education. So keeping girls in school and making sure every girl gets a fair education.
Education is absolutely the first prerequisite. And by the way, I think I said it, but I repeat myself while I go with the mic. Education is one of the things more affected with COVID, you know, in many parts of the world. Yes?
I just wanted to add on that with education as well, because as many of my colleagues know, I was a high school teacher before this, and I think not only seeing that in Senegal, but just seeing it in rural America and the US, I think that's a huge, huge key in pushing women what they can do, because where I'm from, you don't have many opportunities to come to a school like IE or for women to dream that they can do that. So I think that is a huge, huge aspect. Not only, I mean, sometimes we overlook, thinking, hey, you're from the US, you can do that, but that's where I'm from, that is just not a thing. So I think that would be a huge push as well with education and just seeing it as a teacher myself, so.
Do I recall correctly that you are from Illinois?
Yes, so Southern Illinois.
Well, I went to high school my senior year in Missouri.
Ah, whereabouts in Missouri?
That was Vandalia, Missouri.
Okay.
And probably you don't know Vandalia because it's a 3,000 inhabitants town, very close to Hannibal.
Yes,
Hannibal, of course,
yes,
most people know because of Tom Sawyer. So that's where I went there 1 year. I did my senior year there. So I do know what you are talking about. I went from a large city in my country, the second or third, depending on who you talk to in my country, for me the second, to this little town. And it was an amazing experience, but it was an eye-opener experience because in many ways, I had access to many more things back home, although I learned a lot from the experience. So you are totally right. And that's the other thing in going back to a grassroots movements and the connection, the global connection. Often there is more commonality between different societies or different groups in different towns, in different small towns across the world than between those towns and large cities within that country, within a country. And that is something that one loses sight of, and it's important to make those connections because you can raise issues on a global scale that otherwise get lost. Anyone will want to answer from the screen?
If no, I will have also like education in my part because at least in Martinique, currently people my age, there are 15% of them that are illiterate, which is totally abnormal because it's French territory, so we should all have the same level as in French. And I know that women are more affected in this place, and you can see the difference. Like every time I go back and I met some women my age, I'm just so surprised. Like I'm 21, they already have kids, and it's normal for them, and they are not thinking about going outside, discovering more stuff about the world because they never had the chance to learn more. And so that's why, like, I think education in general is really important. And also, like, if we want to have more economic prosperity and power, we also have to educate women. And it's also to put them in more sphere like science. I remember when I was in high school, I was doing a major in mathematics, and I was one of the few girls because it was not really normal to be doing like science. There was even like a bias saying that women couldn't really do science and math, and that it was really not for us. It was also adding an additional pressure on all those women to be like the best they could. And I think even right now, in general, in the master, women are trying their best to be always the best because it's not just about your capacities, it's also about proving that, like, defending women as a whole.
If I can say something, I think we are hitting pretty much the end of the time we have, and I'm respectful of everyone's time. First, think about what you want to fight for and put it at the forefront. Bring your colleagues, male colleagues, to the fight, because this is not about only women's perspective. It's a society perspective. Is society being fully represented, including all the different groups that have something to say? That's one thing. The other thing is trust yourself, believe in yourself. And that can only grow from having the right level of education, and families here play a big role, the empowerment that comes from your parents, but translating that on being ready to seize the opportunities as they come. Don't let opportunities go by. And you just said something that is very important. Not everybody is able to come to an IE-like institution. Well, you are here. You are blessed with this opportunity. Take the utmost out of it. and project what you want to do and what you want to be into everyday's choices. And trust yourself, trust your gut, trust your instinct. That will make a big difference. So I really find interesting this conversation because yes, it's true that there are new issues that are important, that are raised. But in the end, some of the fundamentals remain the same. And going back to education as a fundamental, that is a continuum, and education is a big unfinished business in many parts of the world. And as many good indicators you can show that how much progress has been made, many parts of the world are still in the dark age. So let's push for that. Work on these opportunities that Generation Equality Forum brings. Be active, be involved, and raise your voices to make sure that the agenda evolves to the place where you think it should evolve. It's yours. It's ours.
Thank you very much for everything you talked about today. And I would like also to thank the IE Arts and Humanities and also the Global Women's Leadership to organizing such events that are really insightful for everyone, I think.
Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
And happy Women's Month.